Before viewing video lessons, it is important to read the textbook using the learning guide as your turn-by-turn directions. Then use the learning guide to take organized notes in your own words with examples and pictures. This will continue our lessons on stress, coping, and health. The focus will be on behavioral responses to stress, improving coping, and stress management. As we previously discussed, potentially stressful events are neither good nor bad, but how we view them can impact our response or how we feel stress. Events that are viewed as threatening and overwhelm our ability to cope generally trigger stressful response. What we will focus on are behavioral responses to stress. So the way we act or behaviorally respond to stress is called coping. And you can engage in either adaptive or maladaptive coping mechanisms. So coping can either be constructive or maladaptive. We're going to focus on maladaptive methods first. So the four key maladaptive behaviors we engage in when we confront stress. The first one is learned helplessness. In learned helplessness, people just kind of give up and walk away. Now, learned helplessness is different from sort of temporarily walking away from a bad situation. So if you're having a disagreement with someone, it's not going anywhere, sort of taking a break and walking away can be a good thing. However, if you never come back to resolve the situation, then you've given up. That's the learned helplessness view. Psychologists have been studying learned helplessness in animals for a long time. Some of the studies that they've done have involved cages with floors that shock. And in some cases, the animals have not been allowed to escape the shock, so they've been sort of forced to endure the shock. And what we found is that those animals that don't have a way to escape end up giving up and just sort of sitting down and taking it. And then later on, when we do give them an opportunity for escape, they don't take it because we've essentially taught them to be helpless. Well, this can happen with people too. If you get kicked over and over again, no matter what you do by life, you can kind of learn to give up and be helpless. The next type of stress is frustration aggression hypothesis. This one deals specifically with that frustration type of stress appraisal we talked about. What we find is that when people are feeling frustrated, they tend to respond with aggression. A good example of this would be road rage. What we find is that lashing out at other people in a verbally or physically aggressive manner doesn't tend to make the stress better and can sometimes make it worse. A third type of maladaptive coping is self-indulgence. And in self-indulgence, it can involve engaging in a whole host of behaviors that feel good in the moment, but don't actually make the situation better. These include things like eating, drinking alcohol, smoking, or taking other drugs, shopping, and even just doing nothing is a form of self-indulgence. Not only are these sort of self-indulgent behaviors not helping our stress, they are also hurting our health. So smoking, poor nutrition, not exercising, not getting the right amount of sleep, excessive use of alcohol, caffeine, even other drugs, engaging in risk-taking behaviors are all ways that we sometimes try to cope with stress, and they can hurt our health in addition. So if we can engage in health improving behaviors such as exercise, relaxation to turn off our physiological stress response, getting good sleep, and eating well, then we're going to have an easier time dealing with our stressors. The fourth maladaptive coping technique is defensive coping. And this is the type of coping people engage in when they react in an unconscious way to a stressor. Freud was the first to propose defensive coping. We'll look at these a little bit when we get into the chapter on personality. But for now, you can think about some things that people do, such as regression. This is where somebody behaves in an immature fashion. If any of you have ever worked customer service somewhere and had a customer complaining, sometimes they will act like a child, literally stamping their feet to try to get their way. That would be an example of regression. One that college students tend to be really good at is rationalization. And so you may rationalize that it's better not to study tonight, but just to relax and do nothing because stress is bad for you. And that's kind of using a semi-rational way to justify doing what you really want to do, which is kind of do nothing tonight. So we've talked about all the different ways that we can maladaptively cope with stress. Now what we want to do is focus on constructive coping. Constructive coping usually involves trying to improve on that stressful event. One of the first ways we can do this is to make realistic appraisals. So we know that our stress doesn't come directly from the events, but from our interpretation or appraisal of those events. So if we can change our thoughts and think about the event in a more realistic, reassuring way, that will decrease that emotional, physiological, and behavioral stress response. Another way we can try to constructively cope is to recognize when we're having an extreme emotional reaction and then try to inhibit that or to keep that from getting too far out of control. We also need to recognize when we're having a physiological reaction to stress, and we can engage in relaxation or meditation or exercise to help us manage those reactions. And at the same time, we can engage in good health habits, things that keep our body healthy, will help us in managing stress. Finally, the best way to constructively cope with stress is to act instead of react by confronting the problem directly. So instead of just kind of setting up our lives in a way where we're passively responding to what happens to us, we can try to be proactive. For example, engaging in good time management. At the same time, sometimes things happen to you and there's nothing you could do about them, and knowing when to sort of accept the things that you cannot change is another proactive, active way of coping with stress. Some other factors that help us to cope more effectively are social support. In fact, having a good social support network is not only good for us in terms of stress, it's also good for our overall health. We see better immune functioning in people who have a good social support network. Forgiveness is an important constructive coping technique. Forgiveness is not about the person who wronged you, but it's about you deciding that you are no longer going to let those past events, those past hurts, continue to harm you, and so you can forgive by letting that go. We sometimes find that talking or writing about your feelings can help with constructive coping. Having an overall sense of optimism, sort of looking for the good and the positive in life, and a sense of humor can sometimes cut through stress. While we've focused a lot on the negative aspects of stress, the unpleasant aspects of stress, stress also has positive effects. And one of the most positive effects is it can promote resilience, which can improve your future coping. So today's challenge will pay off in the future because you'll be more resilient. We find that stress can help us develop new skills. Sometimes stress causes you to reevaluate your priorities in life. You can learn new insights about yourself, acquire new strengths, and sometimes when you manage a stressor, it can increase your overall self-esteem. So while stress can sometimes seem like something that's all bad and all negative, there are some good positive aspects associated with stress.